Obviously, not every intervention is successful with all clients, even if it seems like it's a good match. And this is true for biofeedback. It is not successful with all clients and or all conditions. Some barriers to treatment might include a person's confidence in the intervention in and of itself. I mean, if you don't believe something's going to work, chances are it is not going to work. So you have to have a measure of confidence in terms of outcomes, especially for psychological interventions. The other thing is if your motivation is somehow impacted negatively, you have low motivation to achieve success, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Sometimes it can be very much unconscious, especially if there are some significant secondary gains in play. For example, if I'm in the middle of a workers' compensation process, then any work that I might put out in terms of alleviating a pain complaint may be sabotaged by my body unconsciously because of that secondary gain. So low motivation for treatment can have an impact. Certainly if I in general have over my lifetime developed a low internal locus of control, what we call learned helplessness, I may not be able to produce an outcome on my body that I would like to achieve because I'm more externally driven versus feeling confident that I can create those changes. Another thing is that obviously certain target populations would not be a good match for this particular modality. People with psychotic conditions wouldn't be able to especially in severe cases, wouldn't be able to process the information to know what they need to do to get the gains that they hopefully would want to achieve. And really we haven't seen research on biofeedback being helpful with schizophrenia. It can be helpful with anxiety, but again, if a person with schizophrenia can't absorb information appropriately, then they're not going to be able to learn the technique successfully. Another thing is that there may be some intervening variables, some maladaptive ones that may be at play, whether they're internal or external. Internal could be something like, I want to work on relaxation training to reduce generalized anxiety, but before my biofeedback session, I have pumped 3 or 4 cups of coffee into my system, or I've smoked 3 or 4 cigarettes. Well, those are stimulants, and that's not going to help me with the relaxation process. So internal issues, internal variables, I should say, factors, can have an impact on treatment outcome. Also external ones. If I'm in a room that's very, very cold, that might interfere with my ability to warm my hands if I'm working on like migraines, for example. Lots of noises outside the room. If I'm in a building where the fire drill goes off. I mean, all of these types of things, these external variables can have an impact on treatment outcome as well. And certainly the competency of the clinician can have an impact. Is the clinician sophisticated enough to know which technique is going to be most helpful for which presenting problem? And can he or she educate you about how to use this technique wisely? And that leads to the last one, really. Interventions can be abused if you don't understand what's going on physiologically. There was a story of a fellow who had learned thermal biofeedback very successfully in the treatment for his migraines. And one day he was driving home from work. It was in the middle of a vicious snowstorm, and his heater died on him. And he was very, very cold, and his hands were frozen, and he knew biofeedback, and he thought to himself, well, I'll warm my hands. And he did. He was successful. His hands were starting to warm and that sort of thing. And then he passed out and drove into the ditch. Fortunately, he didn't hurt himself. Now, one might say, well, why did that happen? On the surface, it doesn't make sense. But if you understand the body, it would make sense. When we're in frigid weather, cold weather, the body tries to protect two organs especially, the brain and the heart. If you're trying to warm your hands, then you're taking warmth away from the two things that sustain life, you know. And so the body in this situation, in this gentleman's situation, basically it created a stage of unconsciousness in order to save that person's life. They were taking the warmth away from the brain and the heart. And again, fortunately, he wasn't hurt, but that's a hard lesson to learn. You need to understand what you're actually doing to the body so that you don't use it inappropriately. So those are some of the weaknesses revolving around the approach in and of itself. So in your slide presentation, you're supposed to have a summary slide, and basically biofeedback is all about developing physiological control via equipment that you might use, standalone units or computerized equipment. So you gain more awareness about what's going on in your body. You learn to manipulate what's going on in your body, in your body more effectively, so you can produce whatever outcome you want to achieve, which is maybe either greater relaxation or reduced pain perception. So that's a little bit about the description. The goals, again, mind-body balance and internal locus of control, empowerment, and hopefully benefits of, again, achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. Techniques, you've got the thermal biofeedback, EMG biofeedback. You've got, and thermal is body temperature, EMG is muscle tension. You've got galvanic skin response, which looks at skin conductance issues. You've got EEG, electroencephalographic biofeedback, which looks at brainwave patterns. Heart rate variability looks at heart rate, speed, and respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Biofeedback looks at respiration issues. So those are some of the primary techniques used in biofeedback. Strengths and weaknesses, obviously mind-body balance would be a nice strength. Certainly an internal locus of control is a nice strength. Those are things that we talked about in terms of goals, empowerment, and strengths is that for a number of people it can be very helpful. It can actually produce the outcome you want to achieve. In terms of weaknesses, we know it doesn't work for everyone. And we know we can make mistakes if we don't understand exactly what we're doing. We definitely don't want to displace effective treatments or primary treatments. Usually this is what I consider a supplemental treatment approach that can be used in conjunction with a primary treatment intervention to enhance, accentuate the treatment outcome. So that, I think, is in a nutshell what biofeedback is about. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think there's one more video to show. So let me see what the next slide shows here.